So this question is from problem set 7, and it's number 7. And we want to find the inverse of this function, f of x equals x minus 10 squared, and the domain restriction is 10 to infinity. Okay, so kind of give you a picture of what this is. We're looking at then a parabola that's been shifted right 10 units. So it's going to look, something like this. The x-coordinate there is 10. Okay, so what we're saying is this function, if it didn't have the domain restriction and it's just that parabola, does not have an inverse because it's not one-to-one. Remember, only one-to-one functions have inverses, so it has to pass the horizontal line test. So this domain restriction means we're only looking at this half of it. And if I look at that half, then I do have a one-to-one function. Okay? That's why that domain restriction is there. So to find an inverse function, I always start off, instead of f of x, I just put a y. Okay, so I'm just going to look at that thing. And so step 1 is to switch the x and the y coordinates. So we're going to write it as x equals y minus 10. Well, let me get my computer to behave here. Stop that. X equals y minus 10 squared. And once you switch the x and the y, then you solve for y. So to get rid of the squared, since the whole side is squared, I need to get rid of that. I'm going to take a square root. So we take the square roots of both sides of that. Okay? And that's going to leave me with then square root of x equals y minus 10. Now, when you take the square root of x, you actually have an option, a plus or a minus, right? Think about square root of 4. That could be equal to 2, but square root of 4 is also a negative 2, since negative times negative is still a positive, right? So negative 2 times negative 2 is still a positive 4. So whenever you take a square root, you always have to have that plus or minus in there. Then we're going to add 10 to both sides, because we want to get y by itself. So that's going to leave me with a 10 plus or minus the square root of x equals y. Now here's the trick. If we have a plus or minus in there, that's not a function anymore. Okay? So we have to decide which one to use. If you look at the graph of our function over here, these are all greater than 10. The x coordinates for the original function is greater than or equal to 10. The inverse function has those as an output. Okay, so remember, the input, which is the x coordinate, and the output, which is the y coordinate, get switched for the inverse function. Well, if I want an output greater than 10, I better be adding numbers, not subtracting them. So the inverse function, f inverse of x, and where did that little thing come from? I don't know, is going to be 10 plus the square root of x, because we want the output to match up with all the inputs for the original. So that's why we knew it had to be the plus. So that would be our inverse function. But in all cases, you always start off by switching x and y, and then just solve for y. In some cases like this, you have to consider the domain of the original function, because that has to be the range of the inverse function.